So welcome to the first lecture of Module 1. This is the role of technology in K-12 virtual education. With each of our modules, I will always declare what the lesson outcomes for those modules are. And in this case, we have two. The first is to understand the role of technology from a broad perspective in K-12 virtual education. I want to help you get a sense of the landscape, particularly of some of the more emerging or very popular technologies today. And then I want to give you the ability to understand how you may want to evaluate and implement any of those technologies in your own virtual teaching practice. So keep those two outcomes in mind as you work through the content in this module. First, though, before we dive into really the role of technology in K-12 virtual education, I want to make sure that you know that I'm assuming you're already choosing to teach either in a blended or a fully online environment. So the examples and the applications of the technologies that we talk about will be relative to the fact that you are teaching in a virtual setting. Keep that in mind. I know from past iterations of teaching this course and this content, many people will ask questions about how they apply this to a traditional class, and while we won't have examples here, the discussions will be a great place for that. Okay, so why should we even think about using technology, or what is the role of technology today in virtual K-12 education? Well, technology really helps you address who your students are. Your students are coming much more community and civic minded than they ever had in the past. They want to be social, they want to interact with one another, and they like to do this in a virtual space. It actually becomes a continuum for them. They will have activities in their virtual space, interact with each other, socialize, and they'll just bring that directly into the classroom and then continue that experience outside of the classroom. So it makes this environment for them very robust in that technology is just part of the overall learning scheme for them. It's not as though they learn in one space and then they shift gears and learn in another. It's just part of who they are. They're also very feedback driven. They want to know very quickly how well they're doing, how well they're grasping ideas. They want to get better ideas from others very quickly, and they want to be able to grow and see progress and see results as they're learning. Your students are also very individualistic. Now, while they're community and socially interactive, they also want to make sure, though, that they can apply the learning to themselves. They want to know it affects them, it's part of their real world, and that they can connect what they're learning with their lives. They're also very highly visual, and this is where technology comes into play, because while they're highly visual, they're also multitaskers. And so they need to be able to have multiple devices, multiple environments, multiple stimuli coming at them to process in any kind of learning activity. Now, I'm not necessarily encouraging that or saying that's a good thing, but it is what they're coming in with and what they prefer. So it's a good thing to be thinking about as you are trying to help engage those students in your teaching and learning. Now, finally, and we all know this, your students are technology natives. And what we mean by that is that your students just inherently know how to use technologies, at least in the ways they choose. It's going to become important later on when we talk about certain types of technologies because they don't use those in their everyday lives and they're going to need some clear instruction to do that. But with most technologies that we'll probably implement or we'll at least discuss in this course, you'll be able to capitalize on the fact that students already use that technology, are familiar with it, and are comfortable learning in that space. So now that we know students are coming with a desire for technology, and that can be very important in your virtual education. In fact, if you're teaching entirely online, you have to use technology. But it's also important to know that the learning theory aligns with how you use technology or the role of technology in K-12 virtual education. So clearly social learning, when we think about technologies that allow for communities to be built, discussions, asynchronous environments, synchronous environments, that's very social and collaborative in nature. And those technologies are really important in order to implement various kinds of lessons grounded in social learning and collaborative learning. Now, active learning. A number of the technologies we'll discuss in this class focus on having students at the center of the action. They're no longer a passive recipient of the learning, but they're actually driving their learning, very active in their learning, and maybe even some cases constructing their learning paths. Once again, helping to align the use of technology specifically to active learning approaches or constructivist approaches. Now, one thing that technology is great at is problem-solving approaches. And many of us like to use a problem-solving or a case study approach. And even in the United States with our new Common Core legislation, that actually requires students to be thinking holistically about a problem or a concept and not just very specifically about a task. And in that case, technology can be really helpful, particularly with some of the content that we'll discuss and open resources available. Then finally, there's apprenticeship models. You can certainly find great games and simulations that can help students actually learn very specific skills using those technologies. And we'll talk about how that applies as well. But as you can see, the learning theory says that technology could have a very important role in your virtual education. So now that we know students are important in this, of course, that the learning theory helps us dictate how we may want to use that technology, it's also important to know that it can benefit you as a teacher. It can benefit your class and it can benefit your school. Using technology can lead to better results. There's a wide variety of research, much of which will be shared in our resources, that points you to how technology has actually improved learning outcomes. So that in and of itself is important, but it also can give you really good data about your students. It can help you find opportunities when you need to intervene with your teaching and learning experiences, when you need to help your students because they're struggling or perhaps they're more advanced and not engaged in your learning. It also can help you reach your students more broadly. Many of you might be from areas where you don't have in your local physical home community access to experts in the field or access to teachers to teach very specific subjects for students. And technology can help you reach out and get content to help those students learn those subjects without having to bring in all those local resources. Finally, technology can help you as a teacher, can help your school and your district, even your community, with more opportunities for communication and collaboration. And as they say, it takes a village to teach one student. It can take a village in an online environment to help communicate and collaborate and create the right kind of environment for your students to be super successful. Of course, also, it allows for efficiency in delivery. We will talk about this a little more in detail in just a few minutes. But now, when should you use technology? That's an important question. If you're bought into this argument that your students want you to use technology or will be benefited by you using the technology, and you and your practice and your teaching's benefited, and the learning theory says, you know what, it's okay, you can use technology and here are good ways to do that, well, when should you use technology and when shouldn't you? So you should use technology when it provides students with access to materials or experiences that they otherwise couldn't have access to. Now, in virtual learning, this is important because you may not even have a physical classroom anymore. So you have to recreate that, and technology lets you do that. But even in a blended environment, there are online activities, mobile device experiences, even 3D printing and other kinds of technologies that you can use to help give your students access to a richer, more fuller learning experience. You also want to use technology when it improves learning outcomes. I think we all want to do this, but we have to remind ourselves that we don't want to necessarily use technology for technology's sake, but it really should be about helping students learn better. And finally, you want to give students an opportunity for continuous improvement. They can continuously improve their own learning, develop their skills, and grow, and you want technology to help do that. And you want the technology to help you give insights into how well your students are doing that so you can continuously improve. Now, when shouldn't you use technology? I already said one important thing to remember, and that's not to use technology for technology's sake, unless the technology skill is important for your students. They need to learn how to use that tool in order to be successful. And then in that case, it's okay. But you also want to make sure that your technology or your use of technology doesn't hide the fact that there are no outcomes. It doesn't try to hide the fact that your students aren't engaged in their learning. You want to make sure all that's clear before you apply that technology. You also want to make sure it doesn't distract from the content or the skills. There are a lot of tools out there that we can use that students will get wrapped up in the tool, and then suddenly your lesson and the goals of your lesson have vanished, and it's about the tool or the cool toy or the cool technology. While that's important for engagement, you want to make sure it doesn't distract too much from the content or the skills. And then finally, you always have to keep an eye out for student privacy. There are a lot of technologies out there that promise parents and teachers great experiences for students, but that may not be as secure as you want for your students. So you always want to make sure that the technologies you choose protect student privacy. So now, when and how should you be using using technology? When is it important to use technology as opposed to some of your more traditional teaching methods? And in that case, it's when you may want to present or distribute interesting content or different kinds of content, interactive content. You want to encourage students to collaborate, particularly in a virtual education course. You want to make sure that your students at a distance are interacting with one another, collaborating with one another. So it becomes important to use technology in those cases. If you're trying to communicate more richly with your students, or even assess students more richly or more contextually, you can often use technologies to do that. You may want to use technologies to help conduct course or school assessment. It's a way to either make consistent the kinds of assessments that you're using across the institution or organization or school or class, or it may also be a way to get really important data, as I mentioned before, so that you can help just-in-time teach or help your students in the moment learn the skill or develop the concepts that they need to. Now, knowing all of that, take a moment to think about how you might use technology in your teaching today. And not any particular type of technology, but just technology in general. Where can it benefit you? To prompt you a little bit for how to think about that, in case you may not be a K-12 teacher or you may be struggling still, let me give you a little scenario. You're a math teacher with students aged 13 to 18, and you're interested in using tablets. So tablets, not mobile devices, so a tablet like an iPad or Galaxy tablet. And you want to use this in a few lessons, and your school has access to them, so your students can use them. How would you use those tablets? What might you do with your math class? Perhaps use that as a frame to think about how you might apply when you want to use technology in your class. Otherwise, think about your own teaching and where you may want to use it, and this will help you as you venture into the types of technologies that we're going to discuss next.